Welcome. This is my weekly update on the status of the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm doing a series of statistical analyses of the data as they come in, and this is the result for the week ending the 12th of April 2020. My overall conclusion is that since last week we've seen no particular improvement in the figures from this particular pandemic. The rate of infection seems to be increasing as fast as ever. Some countries have managed to flatten the curve, while others are just starting up theirs, and these two effects sort of cancel each other out. The US is still the hotspot with the most infections, and it also now has the most deaths. Well, let's take a look and see how the map has changed over the last week. Some countries seem to have their situation under control, like Japan, South Korea, China, and Iran. Europe still remains an area of worry, with some countries growing relatively quickly, although Spain and Italy seem to be turning their curves down quite significantly. The US has continued to accelerate, as has Canada. South America is beginning to fill in, and they are starting up their curves now. And Africa is also beginning to show up more significant numbers than they had previously, and that's a worry. So let's compare the figures for this week with those of last week. The number of cases last week was 1,272,000. This week it's 1,850,000. That's an increase of 45%. The number of deaths has gone from 69,000 to 114,000. That's an increase of 64%. The number of recoveries has increased by a similar amount, from 260,000 to 430,000. The lethality, which is here defined as the number of deaths divided by the number of cases, was 5.3% last week, is now 6.2%. That may indicate an increase in the lethality of this disease. However, I don't particularly like that definition of lethality. I prefer taking the total number of deaths divided by the number of deaths plus the number of recoveries, and that total has remained pretty constant for the last couple of weeks at about 21%, which in and of itself is a worrying number. At the beginning of this video, I said there was no sign of this pandemic abating, and that bases on this red curve shown here, which is the number of cases as a function of time. You can see that red line is going straight up and there's no change in its slope. But what would we expect if this carries on this way? I've extended that line through to the end of April here, and it would say we would have somewhere between 2.8 and 3 million cases by May 1st. What we're hoping to see at some point is this curve start to flatten out. Now, indeed, some countries have turned their rates over into a flat curve, South Korea and China, for example. When everybody's doing that, this curve will start to deviate from that straight line. So, the prediction with the curve as it currently is about 3 million cases by the 1st of May. If it's less than that on the May the 1st, then we're beginning to turn this curve over. If it's greater than that, then the outbreak is actually accelerating, and that would be very worrying indeed. So only time will tell. We'll just have to wait and see. We were often asking which of the approaches to this pandemic are most effective. So I'm going to tell you a tale of two countries, two very similar countries, Norway and Sweden. Norway put in place very strict enforceable social distancing rules, closed schools, had travel bans, and imposed fines on those that didn't obey the rules. Sweden, on the other hand, just merely gave its citizens a set of advisories and left it up to them to follow those rules. So which has worked the best? On the left we have Norway, and you can see that back at the end of March it had about 4,200 cases, which is actually slightly more than Sweden had. And in the next 15 days, that number increased by about 50%. On the right we have Sweden's numbers. They started off with just 4,000 cases and are now over 10,000 cases, nearly 10,500. So their numbers have gone up by a factor of 2.5. Also, the number of deaths is now at nearly 900, 7 times that of Norway's. So at least in the short term, measured on this sort of statistics, it seems that Norway's approach is far more effective at preserving life and putting less strain on your healthcare system. There's been a lot of talk recently about the COVID-19 problem going away over the summer months. But don't be fooled by that, because it might well come back in the autumn. Here's the curve for the swine flu infections in the UK in 2009. You can see there was a major outbreak in July that went away for August and September, and everybody thought it was over. And then it came roaring back in October and November with actually more cases than there was in July. We don't want to relax our restrictions if we get this sort of issue, because the second wave could hit us harder than the first. So let's take a look at see why the US has streaked to the top of the table as far as infections are concerned. This is a map showing the number of infections as a function of location, and then also the number of deaths associated with each state. And you can see it's pretty well widespread. And the difference between the states may not actually be a real difference at all. It may be just a difference in the amount of testing and the amount of hospitalizations that we've been having, and how they count the number of deaths. Each state is doing its own thing, which is rather disconcerting. Now, one of the things that has come out this week is that the source of the New York infection, which is by far the most virulent part of this whole problem, was from Europe, not from China. The president was very proud about his travel ban blocking China and Iran from sending people here. However, it turns out that that wasn't the course that brought us out most of our trouble. That was from Europe, and that travel ban didn't come in until a long time later. Also, it turns out that the travel ban that was put in place had a lot of holes in it, and over 40,000 people returned to the United States from those two countries during the travel ban, and with no requirement on them, at least initially, to go into isolation. Some disappointing evidence on the side of what treatments we might have available to us to help stem this disease. A lot has been made about hydroxychloroquine, but there was a trial in Brazil that proved unsuccessful. The study took a group of patients and gave half of them a significant dose of this drug and half of them far less, and 6 more people died in the group that got the hydroxychloroquine than the one that didn't. So it seems that the side effects of this drug may actually make you more susceptible to the disease. However, this should be a caution. This is again a statistical issue. This is only done with 80 patients, so the death rate could be just a silly statistical fluctuation and not a real reflection of the effectiveness of this drug. As has been stated, we need to do controlled studies with large groups of people to really flesh out whether this is a problem or a problem solver. So until we have a proven vaccine or some medications that help counteract this disease, then we just have to follow the following rules. Regularly wash your hands, sneeze or cough into a handkerchief, and disinfect any surfaces that may become contaminated. So until next time, stay safe and goodbye.